We are so convinced that we have been so colonized in and out, and everything about the Filipino is coming from the colonizer. And so in this episode, I want to share with you that yes, this is a big influence in the Filipino culture, but the beautiful thing is the Filipino is uncolonizable. So let's talk more about that in this episode. Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak and love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Roanne, licensed psychotherapist mom, immigrant twice, first generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino-American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kapeng barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care, and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. This episode is brought to you by the masterclass called PAKIRAMDAM. This is the ancestral gift of the Filipino that is often misunderstood in the American culture. Any core value has its shadow side. But if you want to learn more about this ancestral lineage of pakiramdam, sensing, or pakikiramdam, when activated, I invite you to the masterclass, Pakiramdam, Filipinos on Affection Beyond Words. Please check the show notes. Kamusta, friends? Welcome to another episode of the Pinoy Love Language podcast. Sometimes I don't even keep track of the number, and when I'm putting the episode description, I always go back and say, is this 32 or 35? But whatever episode, whatever number, I'm so glad that you're joining me today. I'm gonna just do sort of a list of why the Filipino is uncolonizable. Now, one of the manifestations that the Filipino is uncolonizable because the Filipino has not really absorbed the concept of time as far as the Western culture. And often people would complain that the Filipino is always running late, or this Filipino time, or that Filipinos don't RSVP. One of the reasons is the difference on how we perceive the concept of time. There are some research where certain cultures are very specific with their concept of time. It's very linear. If you say it's 2 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock. That most likely the clocks in public places have very little difference. So if it's 2, the clock next block is 2 o'clock, or at least 2:01. But certain cultures like the Philippines, there's a little bit more difference. So it's 2 o'clock in the clock in Makati, or one of the cities in cosmopolitan Philippines. But maybe in Muntinlupa, another city, it's 2:02 or 2:05. So time is a little bit more fluid. There are some anthropological difference that anthropologists have noted how certain groups in Africa, of course this is not all tribes, would see the northeast west very differently from someone in the west. So something to just observe that the Filipinos are uncolonizable because of our concept of time. We use the word pa and na. Pa is not yet there. Na is someone here. So people sometimes get irritated why a Filipino would call and check in. Nandiyan na ba sila? Are they there? When someone say, wala pa, the Filipino may not have the urgency yet to get there because they're not there yet. Pa. Na is that it's already happening. Oh, nandiyan na ba? Or are they there? Okay, now they're gonna start driving to the potluck place. So something to just observe. Another one is that the gender neutrality in our language. A Filipino can keep talking about a classmate. May kalaro ako na nagpunta sa palaruan. I have a friend who went to the playground, and you could keep going for a few minutes, and then the person you're talking to can say, "Oh, hold on. Babae ba to or lalaki? Is he a boy or a girl?" But this is almost unescapable in the English language because we would have to eventually say she or he. Now we have so many pronouns, but even that conveys the preference of the person. But our language is beautifully more gender neutral. Another one that's one of my favorite, and I'll probably do a little bit more research or even write a book, is that the goddesses in the Filipino culture really did not disappear. They just transform. How? In the looks of our Lady Manawag, Virgin Mary, Mama Mary, Lady of Lourdes. So for me, when you look at really from an anthropological viewpoint, it is not safe for the Filipino during the time of the Spaniard colonization, because that's what they were trying to do, is to convert us. But the Filipino is able to find a way to do that, to keep safe, but also at the same time still worship the goddesses. So we have Virgin Marys and all kinds of Lady Manawag. And for me, that's a manifestation that the Filipino is uncolonizable. It's worship of the feminine, which is an archetype. And I want to put it more as an energy rather than a male and female, as in gender feature. So that's one. Another one is that in the West, we're very consumed with, I think this started from the Greek, right? The philosophers and the discovery of science. We now have a methodology for science. You know, you have to ask a question, develop a hypothesis, you have your experiment, leading to your conclusion. So it's very quote unquote evidence based. In the motherland, not that that's not important. We have some great scientists over there, but we continue to embrace the indigenous way of healing, of belief in spirits. I mean, even now, I actually taught my kids who were born and raised in America that when they're walking in the fields, they say, tabi-tabi po, which means talking to spirits that, okay, go on the side because I'm about to pass and I can't see you. So what that teaches is that we're not the only entities in this world. And in the Filipino culture, I want to say that's still very rampant, especially in the rural areas, but I mean, easily also in the cosmopolitan area. Not only with that, but our form of healing. So if someone's sick, they'll do a tawas, or they'll do a hilot, a massage. We do have so many practices that we still keep up. When we're blessing a new home, someone might enter with the salt and, a few pieces of eggs. So we believe in those types of energy. The Filipino has been colonized, but he's not completely colonizable. Let me just talk about a few things. Like I said, this episode will be more like a list. And perhaps in other episodes, I could break down each one facet on this list. But we talk about kapwa, which is, to me, kapwa is the most beautiful core value. When we talk about neurobiology now, how people can continue to connect with each other, it sounds like they're defining kapwa. That, to me, my friend, tells you that the Filipino is uncolonizable. Of course, we would not deny she or he is influenced by that. But when you go to the Philippines, the idea that someone would take a break to help someone is not very uncommon. Now, I do realize anything that's happening in America especially seeps into the Filipino culture. So I'm also observing, listening. I do sense there are some changes in the way we look at things and how people say these things are now offensive, and the culture of America can influence currently the culture, especially in the mainstream cosmopolitan area in the Philippines. So I talk about kapwa, talk about the concept of time, our gender neutrality, space practices, and how our belief is in spirits and energy and goddesses. I could not talk about kapwa without talking about pakiramdam, or when activated, pakikiramdam. So if you are into learning more of that ancestral lineage of sensing, of attunement, check out the masterclass that I would link in the show notes. But for me, this is what is different from us and the colonizer, is the sense of attunement, because we get that from being close to nature. I think about Moana, if you've seen the movie Moana, and how she determines where to go by just putting her hands in the water. When I talk about attunement, pakikiramdam, that's the basis of that. It's listening to nature. I was just walking and there's a beautiful Filipina manang in my neighborhood, and I was telling her I saw an egg, I think a bird injured its wings, and it just laid eggs right there on the grass. And she was telling me I could check if the egg is still alive if I put it up to the sun. And she was talking about if it's opaque or if it's transparent and what that means. Those things are very natural for Filipinos, especially when they live in the rural areas. Again, the Filipino has not been completely colonized. I know there's a lot of talk about patriarchy, and yes, we're always learning. For me, we do want women to excel, to have the same spacing and rights as our male counterparts. I am not gonna deny that patriarchy no longer exists in the Filipino culture. That would not be accurate. But the Filipina sometimes can be misunderstood in the Western culture, and sometimes the Filipina in the motherland could be misunderstood by the westernized women, because maybe they're quieter, maybe they apologize more. I mean, quite frankly, the word sorry, pasensya na, is not really translatable directly. It's more like bear with me. But many Filipino might say sorry, but they don't really mean they're sorry. They just mean excuse me. Or what's interesting is in spaces, and this is not just for Filipino women, but just in general, we're always talking about some Filipino in this podcast, in my writing. It would just be impossible to talk about every Filipino. Of course, we're not doing that. But that a Filipino might agree with a person, or they look like they're nodding, but many times they're agreeing to their right to speak, but not necessarily to the content of what they're saying. I noticed myself do this the last time when I was in a group of clinicians. I was agreeing and thanking the person for them using their voice, but I don't necessarily agree to specific content. But it was just me because I agree. I like when people are able to express. It's not always about disagreeing, and it's always not about stating that that's not my shared perspective. There is a time for that. I think I digress, but what I'm saying is the Filipina is very empowered and sometimes misunderstood in the lens of the Western culture. But for me, that is also a manifestation that the Filipino is not completely colonizable. Let me share one more. And again, if you're interested in learning more about the ancestral Filipino core value of pakikiramdam. I talk about in the masterclass the difference in the way we self-soothe. This is quite important, I find, because I keep sharing it or teaching it when I'm doing therapy in multi-generational Filipino household, and also with interracial couples with one person as identifying as Filipino. Now, the last thing that I would share is that because Filipinos are very relational, so malalim ang pakikisalamuha, as scholars would say, the reputation for a Filipino is sometimes extremely important, right? Because when someone refers their business to you or to someone, they usually refer because of your reputation. So there is less contract, there's less abiding by law. It's nice to abide by the law, and we do need more discipline in doing that. My point is it's less westernized compared to America, where everything has to have some contract. In the Filipino, right, if you go to the sari-sari store, this corner store, they say pautang naman, meaning I'll pay later. And it's usually the person who's selling or owns the sari-sari store is agreeing based on the person's reputation. So we're very different in that sense. And in any of this manifestation, I'm not assigning whether it's good or bad, but basically something to think about, that we, you, and I have not been completely colonized. I'm just sharing all this because there is this movement, this theory. We talk so much about how we have been colonized, and when there is a block and we think that the reason why we could not keep moving is because of the influence of just one thing, when in fact that truly is a big influence, but there are other influences. It keeps us from moving or trying to find other solution. So I hope this has been helpful. The Filipino you have not been completely colonized. Is just something that is a part of us but does not completely has agency over you. I leave you with that message that the Filipino has not been completely colonized. You are uncolonizable. Salamat sa pakikinig, and sa ulitin. Bye now.